President Trump effectively ends asylum as we know it. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, the Trump administration has just filed a new rule with the Federal Register that was supposed to go into effect this week, basically saying that if you're a migrant who's passing through another country before you get to the United States, that if you're going to seek asylum, you should seek asylum in that country, in that third country, so to speak. The left, of course, is immediately upset about this, as are the people in Mexico who are now having to deal with asylum claims from Guatemalans and Hondurans and El Salvadorans and Africans and other people who come through their territories. Bill, just on the face of it, I know you've said before that Emma Lazarus' poem that is engraved on the base of the Statue of Liberty, "Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," what is it called? The wretched refuse of those teeming shores. Yeah. But you've always said, well, we don't need to send only the wretched refuse. We can send everybody.
That's right.
Here we're basically saying, this is the country that's been known for people seeking asylum here. And we're saying, hey, go get asylum in Mexico.
This is the country that's been known for asylum, and I think the idea of asylum is a sacred idea, and I think America as the home of asylum is a key part of our national identity, and I don't want to see that changed at all. But we're not talking about asylum here. And this is why when you first read that headline, just like everybody else on the left, I felt this kind of cringe of, oh, we're not asylum. And it's like he said, no, we're not. This is no longer the home of asylum as we know it. Asylum means a refuge from persecution. That's basically the definition of an asylum. And when you have people coming up from all of South America through the very small, narrow southern border of Mexico, and they start these caravans through Mexico, and the Mexican government offers them asylum, for them to not accept asylum and to keep coming to the United States, this is not asylum, this is real estate shopping. That's all there is to it.
Well, Attorney General William Barr basically says, hey, the United States of America is a compassionate country, but we are seeing increasing numbers of people exploiting our asylum system for what is essentially economic reasons. They just want to have better job prospects. Right. Bill, why isn't that a legitimate human rights need?
Well, Scott, this is one of the wonders of the age, and I'm not being flip about this. I'm really not. I remember growing up in the 60s, there was a period there of about, 7, 8 years when the United Nations, which was still new, seemed like the answer to everything. There's going to be United Nations missions to space and the man from U.N.C.L.E., and all of this stuff. And the United Nations represented this idea that the entire world would soon be able to come up to the standards of Western technology, economics, and living standards. And what happened was the United Nations simply got taken over by a bunch of dictators and lunatics who have used it to pull the developed country down to the level of the lowest members. And so when you say, why can't we be a place for all of the economically downtrodden people in the world, the answer is that the entire world is economically downtrodden when compared to the United States. The richest Africans in the world are African Americans. Richest Norwegians in the world are Norwegian Americans, and richest Arabs in the world.
But we're not talking about an influx of Norwegians across our southern border, are we?
Why?
Well, because the entire world is not, in fact, in an economically desperate situation.
Okay. So what you're saying is there are some systems that work and some systems that don't, right?
And some of these systems that are not working would claim to be democratic systems like our own.
Well, they can claim whatever they want to. We're not talking about political asylum now. You specifically said this is economic asylum.
Well, that's what the Attorney General of the United States is saying, that people are abusing the asylum system.
This is this particular subject that we're talking about now. I'm happy to talk about political asylum in a minute. If you're telling me that Norwegians are not seeking economic asylum in the United States, you'd probably be shocked to find out that not many Canadians are doing that either, or Australians, or Japanese, or South Africans, or Chinese, or Koreans for that, South Koreans. The North Koreans don't even know the country exists, really, except as some boogeyman responsible for all of their problems. So what you're saying is that when the United States should be considered an open home for anybody seeking economic asylum, you're already acknowledging the fact that there are large portions of the earth, at least in terms of area, if relatively small percentages of populations, where we don't have to worry about economic asylum seekers because their economies work, which is telling me that this is not some magical place that the luck fairy just happened to land on when her meteorite crashed to the earth. You know, that there are some things that we're doing here in America and that they're doing in the West in general, Western countries as a sort of a broad sense of this particular model, that work just fine.
Well, in the meantime, Bill, these individual people who are coming from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, or elsewhere and passing through Mexico on their way to the United States across the southern border, these are not statistics. There's a guy, there's a woman, there's a child who has just one life in which to exercise as much individual liberty and happiness as they can. And basically, if that means getting to the United States of America, we're saying, sorry, wish you could live for 300 years, but it's not going to happen during this lifetime.
That's a very interesting point, and I'm very glad you brought that up. You said that there are people right now, let's say from Nicaragua or whatever, traveling through Mexico to get to the United States. And you say the reason they're doing it is because the individuals there have a burning thirst for liberty, and they're willing to take a chance to make this crossing and to come here. These are precisely the people that their home countries need the most. These are precisely the people who are capable of making the changes at home necessary for those countries to come out of the economic stone ages and join the rest of the world. And what has happened is that the idea of coming to America has basically told the rest of the world, you don't have to solve your own problems. If you don't like it, just come here. And furthermore, and much more importantly, look, I don't have a problem with immigration. I really don't. I don't even know if I'd have a problem with illegal. I certainly would have a problem with illegal immigration from a philosophical standpoint. But if it turned out that these people were bringing the kind of work ethic and desire for education and delayed gratification and all of the things that made immigration to the United States work, the idea of a family getting off of a boat from Italy in 1903, let's say, not speaking a word of English, and not taking a dime of help and depending on their relatives to get them jobs, and then insisting at the point of a belt that their children would speak English and become Americans. If we were seeing that today, I'd have a much smaller problem with this, but that's not what we're seeing.
Well, I would argue we are seeing that. In a small percentage, though, we are not. So the example that the right always gives, Bill, is what Ronald Reagan used to derisively refer to as the welfare queens. It's the people who are taking advantage of our system, the people who are, in fact, lazy and indigent and want to rely on government. But the vast majority of immigrants to this country are not like that at all, and you see them working 2 and 3 jobs all around you.
Couldn't agree more. Here in Los Angeles, I've been here since 1988, and the hardest working people I've ever seen in my life are the Mexicans that are here. Most of them are here legally. Some of them aren't. I don't have any way of knowing which is which. I just admire them enormously. I think they're hardworking people, and I think they're family people. But Scott, when you get right down to it, if you really want to get down to the brass tacks of it, and really cut past all of the discussion, we are facing the same moral dilemma that people in a lifeboat are faced when they are the only lifeboat in a sea of people who are drowning. And if the people who were drowning were to basically just form an orderly line and kind of hang on to each other and so on, that'd be a different story. But that's not what happens. When people are that desperate, they start clawing themselves into the lifeboat. And the inevitable result of this is that the lifeboat overturns and everybody goes down. And
let's talk about that line for a second, because there are some 800,000 to 1 million, depending on whose figures you believe, people already in line with asylum claims in the United States of America. Only about 20% of those asylum claims are evaluated as legitimate. But the problem in this country is, as far as that process goes, is those people have to go somewhere where they're waiting for that long list. They go to the back of the line and they're waiting for that to be adjudicated. And so they just kind of melt into American society. It could be for months, for years, and never show up again to have those adjudicated. But frankly, Bill, this is a broken system, even if you believe that every one of those people had a legitimate claim. Why should we persist in something that has been so dysfunctional for so long?
Well, this is why I made the distinction earlier about economic asylum versus political asylum. Economic asylum essentially means my economy sucks, there's no work here, there's no money, and everything is just junk, okay? And that applies to pretty much the entire world in terms of population. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's certainly in excess of 80% of the population of the world would very, very, very much like to come here or Norway or Britain or whatever and live there because those systems work a lot better. So when we talk about asylum, we're not talking about improving your standard of living. Asylum, by definition, means a place where you can go when you are in fear of your life. Originally, at least the term that I'm most familiar with it is that the early days of the Christian church in Europe presented asylum. You could literally be on the run from barons or dukes or whatever, and if you got yourself to a monastery or something, you were on Christ's ground and they couldn't come and get you. So asylum for people who are running for their lives, I think, is an important thing for the world to have. But I also don't understand why the United States should be the only place that is considered asylum. Now, as it turns out, when we saw this huge immigration wave back in 2015 into Europe, they were all claiming it was asylum too. But it turned out that the microscopic number of those people were actually running from the threat of being killed. Most of them were running to places that worked. And the part about this that is so enraging and so destructive and so harmful to their own cause is that the people who managed to get to the West, fleeing the economic systems and the political systems that drove them here, the first thing they seem to want to do is employ those systems here. And when I say here, I mean the West. I mean, you would think that if Europe was going to take in millions and millions and millions of people from Algeria and Libya and all of these countries where nothing works, and they're trying to get away and they're saying, oh, please, we just want political freedom. Please, we just want a chance to raise our kids just like you do. You would think that those people would be the most fervent advocates of a Western way of thinking, but that's not what happens. They get into these countries and they start calling for Sharia and Sharia-only neighborhoods, and there are places now in Sweden, which is probably the most civilized place in the world, where you simply can't go. You're not day or night. If you walk into certain neighborhoods in Malmo, let's say, somebody's going to get on a phone and other civilians are going to come and they're going to make sure that you leave. And this is not the kind of behavior that in the first place is very either polite or gratitudinous on the part of guests, but secondly, is in fact it is in fact not just an invitation, it is an open declaration that by accepting these people into this country, we are going to destroy the country as we understand it. And while we have a moral, we don't have an obligation. We have a moral calling to do the right thing in cases like this. We are not obligated to slit our own throats and commit suicide in the act of doing it. So if you really want to talk about what the real serious problem here is, the problem, Scott, is not going to go away ever until either the United States consists of 6 billion people or Mexico decides to get its act together, form itself its own economy, shed all of the corruption and the crime, and become a kind of place where Mexicans don't want to come to America because they don't have to.
Well, Mexico has some of the same problems that the United States has in the sense of asylum seekers overwhelming their system, and Mexico's system is even less robust than the one in the United States. I'd like to end this on a relatively positive note from the perspective of the Trump administration. There are some exceptions to this rule. Basically, the rule says if you pass through another country on your way to the United States, we're going to reject your asylum claim because you could have stopped in that other country, assuming it was a safe country. There are at least 2 exceptions to that. One is asylum seekers who were denied protection in that third-party country that they sought protection in, and the other is victims of human trafficking. My guess, Bill, is that that's not going to get as much attention in the media as some of the other aspects of this, effectively saying that the Trump administration has erected a wall made of Mexico.
Well, that's a very interesting way of putting it. That's exactly what the Trump administration has done. And about time. Mexico was not only, and I mean historically, but especially for the last 30 years or so, Mexico has not only been allowing this to happen, Mexico's been encouraging this to happen, not just for Mexicans to come and live in America, send the money back, and never really become Americans. You know, I live in Los Angeles. I've lived here since 1988. And anytime there's a soccer game, I see cars, Mexico versus America soccer game, I see cars flying Mexican flags all over the place here. I'm fine with national pride and everything, but there is, without question, huge numbers of people that either are citizens, want to become citizens, and don't in any way identify themselves as Americans in the way that every single other group that has immigrated to this country has in the entire history of this country. But what you're saying here is that this idea of asylum is, number one, not something that the United States alone has the moral obligation to shelter, but also that it means you're in danger of your life. And when you say use the term made a wall out of Mexico, what Donald Trump has basically said is, if you won't control the border with the United States, this is him speaking to the Mexican government. We've seen this for 40 years now. You not only won't control it, you've got posters up. You've got billboards up by the Mexican government explaining how and when and where to get here and stuff illegally. So if that's the case, then we're going to hurt you economically until you get this under control. And now all of a sudden, Mexico has to deal with the consequences of Mexico's political choices for the last 40, 50 years, and essentially for the last 200. And now they have to be held responsible for maintaining the borders of their own country, and for them to cry about it, for them to say, well, we are being overwhelmed by influxes of immigrants on our southern border. You can only imagine the kind of sympathy that engenders among the American people, how our hearts just reach out to these corrupt politicians who've been using this as a tool for their own personal enrichment. This idea of just being a funnel, and that's exactly what it is, by the way. Just look at the map. It's just a funnel. The idea of Mexico being a funnel into America, all of their problems come to us, all of their corruption issues, they don't have to deal with them. The people just leave and come to America. Now they're beginning to have to deal with what we've had to deal with for the last 40 years. And for them to be complaining about it is actually the most encouraging sign that I've seen that things are actually changing now. And they're changing because Donald Trump has decided to make Mexico live up to its own immigration laws. I just want to close by saying this for all of those people who think I'm just this heartless monster out there, When people say, well, what kind of, I suppose you want immigration laws where you have to pass a blood purity test. No. What kind of immigration laws I would take? If you were to take Mexico's national immigration laws, cross out the word Mexico, put in the United States, I would vote to enact that tomorrow. Tomorrow. If Mexico were to live up to its own standards, we wouldn't have a problem, and eventually Mexico wouldn't either. So this idea that somehow it's the rich white man in the north, basically turning away people as they get gunned down in the back, by these relentless hordes of death squads, is just plain a lie. And let's not you want to close on something worthwhile. Let's close on something worthwhile. This entire policy of immigration coming almost exclusively from South America was a conscious decision made by the Democrats. Teddy Kennedy basically pushed this thing through Congress because he understood, Scott, that if you were to have equal parts of immigration to America from Norway, let's say, and from Nicaragua, let's say, that the people coming in from Norway would vote Republican because their societies work and they're able to set up jobs and they're able to do things and actually make a living here. This entire problem is not a problem. It's for the Democrats. It's a huge problem for America. It's not a problem for the Democrats. They are importing workers to do the jobs that Americans won't do. And that job is vote for Democrats. And that's all there is to it. And as America gets more successful and more prosperous, and so does the rest of the world for that matter, the Democrats' case gets weaker and weaker. And so as they go further and further to the left, they have to become shriller and shriller about this degeneration of American values, when in point of fact, there has never in the history of the world been a country that is so tolerant, so generous, so open-minded, and so willing to give, willing to basically have our own laws thrown in our faces and be called racists and stuff, out of the generosity we have, because any country that is an actual country has the right to defend its borders with machine gun posts if that's what it took. We're not doing that, and no one's talking about doing that. So to paint us as these kind of monsters because every single person in the neighborhood has decided that they want to come in and sleep on our couch and watch our cable TV and stuff and raid the refrigerator, and us having a problem with this is all of a sudden somehow way beneath us. This is not who we are. Please. The main issue is, can the world eventually learn to take care of itself, yes or no? And if the answer is no, then they're not all going to fit into the United States. We're not going to be able to take 10 billion people in the country, and that lifeboat overturns. And the people who are coming here are the ones who are the most likely to be able to do some good back home, which is what we did, for God's sakes. It's not like, the wealth ferry didn't crash into America. We earned this, and we protected it with the lives of soldiers and many, many other millions of people who have died to protect this idea. And now other people want to take advantage of those sacrifices. And when I say sacrifices, I'm not just talking about guys on Iwo Jima. When I say sacrifices, the sacrifices I'm talking about are the sacrifices of an inner city mother who gets up at 5:30 in the morning so that she can get on a bus and go to her job. And every single other American who gets up at 7 o'clock in the morning and goes to work. Those sacrifices are what made this country what it is. And when we start seeing that kind of behavior in the rest of the world, people won't need to come here.
If you've enjoyed this conversation, you can thank a member at BillWhittle.com. If you'd like to become one of those who are worthy of such gratitude, you can become a member by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking that Become a Member link. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.